Uh, it's the usual. Let me check. Like, I'm so lazy that I haven't set up my own streams announcements. It's so stupid. So it's the usual. Whoops.
Why isn't your own Discord on top?
Yeah. That just says how much I care. Even GC is above.
As deserved.
Mm-hmm. And the other C# Discord is at the top. What the fuck? Okay. Okay, great. You said you'll announce. Okay, I'll announce as well. Java code review.
Yeah, I already see the statics.
Signature things for Java. Okay. Let's go. So from the start, can you guys explain me, is it possible to make a Java project that doesn't have this structure? Because I haven't seen...
It is, yes, but the Gradle is something specific. So.
Like, I haven't seen a project not with this structure. It's always this structure.
Oh, well, you always need a folder in the source because you cannot call... I think it was an issue with you cannot call any file from the source folder.
Mm-hmm. Okay, modules. So, why are there files that are empty? What's the point?
The point is that it can contain content.
Okay. Do you...
I mean, a lot of this seems to be Gradle stuff and build stuff.
Mm-hmm.
The way Java builds and integrates their different versions of libraries is a little bit funky. It's sort of their version of C#'s NuGet.
Mm-hmm. Right. Okay. Let's continue then. There is so little backend code, it seems. Literally, that's all. Database. Okay, there is UI as well. Okay, let's start from database. I think that's like the isolated part that we can look at without any other things. So the things I dislike right away is just random blank lines that don't have any meaning. Okay. What I like in this code at the start, I like the separation of those different namespaces. So this is quite nice. I often forget to do this myself, but I do agree that this makes the packages, the dependencies that this code has more readable if you separate it like that. So that's cool.
I think it's taken care of by the IDE.
C#, I mean, Visual Studio should do that too.
I think you can use a resharper or something like that.
I don't think it does that. It just rearranges it alphabetically if you want. I think that's all. But maybe there is an option. Okay. So, database handler. I hate the name handler. And it seems that it's a singleton, which also makes it very bad because you don't want database handler singleton, as you want the connection to be short-lived. So what happens here? You have connection. Static connection is a no-no because you don't want to keep it open at all times. You want the scope of connection to just be when you need it.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. I don't like the singleton approach. Because quite often with databases, especially if you're going to connect to it frequently, one of the things is one of the things that you would usually do here is pull the connection. But if I could just
Yeah.
but back up a little bit because this is a pet peeve of mine, and I understand is that it's convenient, but I still don't like it when I see it. It's like the import statement. Now the thing is, like, people get into the habit of importing everything, and you can see Swing, everything's imported. SQL, everything's imported. Import whatever you need, as and when you need it. And yes, it will contain more namespaces, so this content will be a bit more clogged up with import statements. But it's better than just importing everything, because when you compile your or when you build your project, you are also building all of their namespaces, some of which you are not using, but you're building it anyway because you've imported everything. So that's a really bad habit I see mainly with Java code.
Yeah. To be.
Yes, that's also all to do with how the IDE handles it. Yeah, in C Sharp you only import one thing, like the IDE.
Mm-hmm. So when you create a new file, you get all those things by default?
No, but like, so if you use something that's not yet imported, they might import everything, the IDE. And developers are just like lazy to check it.
Wow, I didn't realize that was something done for you by default. So shame on Java developers, like, because it is really bad. But I didn't know that it was something which the IDE did for you. I just thought that it was developers being lazy. I mean, it shouldn't be the default implementation or the default behavior of that. But
Right, it's not. I think there it might be have something to do with formatting options and not the default. Not the default choice when you have to import something, but the formatting and like code refactoring.
All right, let's continue. So database connection should not be global. It should be short-lived. And if we continue looking at this, it seems to be using local database, SQLite. And now I'm reading and I see path called slick path. I don't know what that is for. So
It also has capital S.
oh, you use camel case, right, in Java.
Right, so lowercase s.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
No prefix underscore.
All right. So camel case. Also, what is slick path? Slide path.
I mean, it might be a project specific, in which case it isn't that bad.
Still, as an outside reader, I don't know what this is for, and at least a comment would be nice. Okay, so this is Java way of saying that it can throw an exception. Is it mandatory if it throws, or is it optional?
Okay, so when some code throws an exception, you have to handle it somehow. So either you catch it, or you say to the next method that calls that method, hey, I'm throwing something and you have to handle it. So you're passing it over. In this case, he is try catching it, and at the same time, he is declaring it as throws an SQL exception, which is very strange. That might have something to do with create connection and create new table method.
Okay.
The last two lines you should look.
Those?
Yes, those two. If they throw something, it might make sense.
Probably this one does. Yeah, this definitely can throw. SQL exception.
Right. In that case, it could make sense.
Okay.
Yeah, that part of the method signature seems fine to me. I don't think there's an equivalent in C#. I mean, in C# you just handle the connection.
Yeah.
In Java, you can throw the connection and then choose to handle it. But
Yeah.
a couple of things about this code which stand out to me. First, I just want to say this DB URL thing. This is a path to your database, which is fine, but it shouldn't live here, right? Usually it would live in some sort of resource file. I'm not sure if Java has an equivalent of app.config or whatever, but it should ideally be in some sort of preferences file which you read in. It shouldn't just be hard-coded like that.
Yeah.
And this method, another thing I want to point out is this method uses the try catch, right, which is fine because it's dealing with an exception, but and I'm not sure what version of Java this guy's actually using. I'm assuming that it's a fairly modern version of Java, right? In which case, he would have access to something called the try with resources, right? Try with resources is essentially like a using statement for C#. It basically automatically cleans up or disposes when it comes out of when the code goes out of scope. Here, I mean, it would be fine if he put, or if the guy put like a finally statement to clean things up, but you know, this is not the case. But to avoid the try catch finally block, I would just use the try with resources and look into that.
Well, the point is we're here making a connection in the constructor, which doesn't sound very good either, except if we have some the Java's equivalent of idisposable. It is how it's called again?
What do you mean?
Yeah, it's called try with
Oh.
resources. Yeah.
No, you can implement also an interface in Java, such as idisposable. And in that case, it would make sense to have create connection in the constructor. But currently, you create a connection in the constructor, and then you never close it there. You just
Yeah.
leave it.
Yeah.
Exactly. You know, and that kind of raises a red flag, especially when working with files or databases, because you aren't cleaning up after yourself. Now, granted, this is Java, and the garbage collector will do that for you, but you as a programmer should get into the habit of cleaning up any unused resources. So I would expect to see like file.close, file.dispose, and you know, somewhere you could create a dispose method and call that. You could use the finally block, but I would expect to see it somewhere in your code where you're actually opening and closing these connections, because these are disk operations which can be quite expensive.
The interface is called closable, by the way.
Oh, okay.
Oh right, I didn't know that Java had their own disposable.
Right. So that's much cleaner, and then it's okay to have it in the constructor, because the whole object handles it the whole class.
So use is it iClosable? Is it just closable? What's the
Just closable.
use closable interface? So what will happen? Like, so what's the point? Like, okay, you make a connection, you don't do anything, and it closes immediately, or what? What's the point? If it's comparable to using.
In that case, you can use it as with a try with resource, and you can call close yourself. So currently you have it in the
Oh, okay.
constructor, and never is it being closed, because the constructor shouldn't close it, because there should be methods called on that connection. And yeah.
So to indicate that this resource is unmanaged, and needs explicit call to clean up all the resources, like close connection. Because especially open a connection, right, to a database and your application terminates, you don't dispose this object, you don't clean up. That means the connection is open. So every time you start an application, you create a new connection, so it just keeps on piling up, unnecessarily so. All right. So I also don't really understand. The guy did have those two methods, but this one is kind of raw thing. So I would also split this as a method. So
Also, what is it even doing? Like, the whole try catch. It would have been much nicer if it was a method for that.
yeah, a method
Currently, I
for
wouldn't know what
this.
it's doing. There are also system.out.print lines, which should be a logger. And it's also not in English, which is quite a big problem.
Yeah, and also I will say is that this throws SQL exception. This is kind of the wrong, I guess, exception to throw. Now I understand is that you've got create connection and create new table, which would also throw SQL exception. But this whole try catch block is dealing with a file, so in that case it should really throw like an IO exception.
No, so he try catches that one, and if an IO exception happens, it will just print it out. But there's nothing severe going on when that happens. So that's not handled like. Well, it is handled, but there's not being thrown an IO exception. But after that, it will throw. So it kind of makes sense. I just don't know why it is doing something with a file, and I have a lot of questions for that.
Yeah. In my opinion, it's more of a like a separation of concerns thing. Because you've got this constructor opening the connection and also handling this file. There should be two separate methods. Handle database and handle file. The database portion throws the SQL exception. The file throws the IO exception.
Do you still mark it if you handle it?
No, so you don't have to mark this because you handle here.
Okay.
So if you would have marked it as throw, then the other method, the constructor in this case, should handle.
Great. Right. So have it there. Oops. Okay, so this is kind of cleaned up.
You already had the curly brace. It's.
Oh yeah. Damn it. Yes. Okay. Okay, so let's move on to other parts. Oh, Java's getters and setters. Get instance. Does this throw SQL exception? New database handler. Oh yes, because of this. Okay. Create table. This looks really off. I think it should be in a
part.
Yeah.
I do like it. Yeah.
Okay. It just feels that curing database, accessing it, and creating it are two different things. So I don't really like having database creation in the place where you do the curing as well. It just seems basically everything that's database related will be in this one.
Yeah, it kind of, even though is that all this stuff is to do with the database, so technically it's it's the same responsibility. In my opinion, this violates SIO because you would want to maintain that separation of concerns between accessing the database and then performing some operation on the data, whether it be create new tables. So what I would do is the create logic would be in its own class.
And yeah, I agree. And this is again redundant. There is already DB URL, so you don't need that one. And I would put this again to some SQL file, because now you're mixing SQL and Java, which is also a bad practice to mix two languages in one file. And how are you even supposed to edit this? Like if you add a new line or change something, you will need to again take care of all those alignments and stuff. It's really frustrating to edit this. And if you had just the SQL file, you could then read the SQL from some file and run that instead of just having raw string here. Right, so creating a database like tables, etc. should be moved
This one is quite interesting.
to another part.
Because we actually at work we have a lot of these SQL strings everywhere. So
Really?
yes, really, yeah. It's yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, I wouldn't say it's necessarily a bad thing to do, although if you wanted to sort of, design it, I guess, with a bit more of a robust system, or you wanted to make it more, just make it more robust in general, this could go as part of like a pattern, let's say a builder pattern. But
Right,
but as is, I think it's fine. I just don't think it should be within this class. I think if you are going to have a method like this with a bunch of create tables, I think that would be served better to at least be in its own class with its own methods to create, various tables.
Right. Okay, so this one can now be this one. SQL, execute, try catch, makes sense. Okay. Do something with file, we extracted that, so we already had a look at it. Create connection.
still wondering what it's doing.
The guy said it's the path for the folder in which cover images will be stored.
Okay.
So cover images. I don't see cover images from this.
Nope, same. In any case, the code is not very is not explaining a lot.
Yeah, like lines is a bad name for variable as it says nothing. Nothing about what is it for. Then we have, then we don't have anything. So yes, if you have a hard time explaining yourself with code, at least add a few comments. Okay, so exec query. So this seems to be probably suiting, as it's a part of database handler. This is fitting. Result set. So if connection is null, no connection, else create statement, execute query. I guess this seems fair enough. Exec action. So you have commands and queries. Probably command is a better word. I'm not sure. Action, command, nitpicking. Also, so there you wrote query and there you wrote queue. So it's a bit weird. I would say it's an action. Execute action sounds better. So query is something that gets data, and a command is something that modifies database stuff. So query is just reads, and execute action is delete, update,
Also, this
or
is a
create.
little while ago for me, but if I remember it correctly, you should use prepared statement to prevent SQL injections.
Yeah, definitely.
True, true. Command. So don't execute raw SQL as it poses a risk of SQL injection. Use prepared statements instead. And parameterized queries.
Also,
statements.
doesn't the execute method of the stmt.execute, doesn't that return a boolean?
Yes.
Maybe you can hover over it?
I don't have. This is fake. I don't have Java installed. Probably. It would make sense. STMT is statement. We can quickly have a look. Statement, Java, SQL. Let's see. Statement, extends wrapper, result set, execute.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yep, it returns a boolean.
Okay. Okay. Result set, execute, create statement. Okay. This is one extra semicolon.
Yeah, so I don't think that execute then actually throws, but only the create statement. And then you could have the return statement outside the track edge.
Yeah, I think this execute command could also be cleaned up a bit. You don't have to return true and then return false necessarily. You can sort of do like a tertiary statement to where if it returns true, then the code will just run. You know, you don't have to worry about the false, because if it returns false, then it just simply won't run. You know, it's I do think this is quite an explicit way of sort of creating this this method, but I do think it could be sort of, you know, condensed down a bit.
Also, one huge issue is the J option pane is showing UI in the database handler.
Yeah. I was just about to bring that up as well. You were mixing layers. You know, if you think of your project in terms of the various layers, you know, which would often be your data access layer, which is where your database lives, your presentation layer, like where your UI and whatever else lives. Well, the J option pane, because it's a GUI element, it should live in the view, or, you know, within the presentation layer, not in your backend. You shouldn't mix the two consoles.
To the GUI layer. UI layer. Okay. Finally is also not needed, I presume, as you don't do anything.
Right.
And
also,
yeah.
you have an empty finally block, which is, you know, I'm happy that the finally block is there, but if it's empty, it's not doing anything.
Right, so now you could... Wait, so I think that the create statement should be in a try, right? And then the return statement outside the whole try edge block. I think so.
Are you sure? Because to me it looks like this froze.
I think that execute doesn't throw and just returns false when it didn't work.
Oh, okay, that makes sense. Yeah. Yeah.
Also, another thing which I've noticed as well, and I'm not too sure on this, so one of you will have to correct me if I'm wrong, but in this catch statement and in the other catch statement in the constructor, you print the stack trace. Now, it's my understanding is that printing the stack trace is fine for debugging, but it's not something which you want to do in production, right?
Well, in production, you wouldn't use the console in the first place. You would just use the logger.
True, yeah, that's true. But the idea is that you wouldn't want to dump all of this information either to the console or within a log. You know, you would want to give more of a, you would want to sort of print the message or give a user-defined message. But I don't think is that you would want to use the stack trace in production. I could be wrong about that. You know, it's just I thought that it would have yielded too much information about the system.
I would log it, but yeah, like the log messages are for developers, and thus it should be logged. I think.
Yeah, I agree to Julian. It does make sense to have context of something that went wrong.
Yeah, I think this would make sense if just the developers were seeing it. But if this ever cascaded down into, you know, into the user seeing the stack trace or whatever, you know, I think that could be, you know, pretty bad. But you know, in either case, instead of printing the stack trace, I would probably log that somewhere else. Maybe it's like expose an event. So like when an event when a crash does occurs, you sort of provide a message to the user or to the developer, but you log the stack trace elsewhere, sort of thing.
Well, yeah. Just in the logs, then it would be fine. So this should be in the logs, and for the user, you should print something more general. Also, this should go to UI layer. Okay. Great. Let's move on to actual UI layer now. Okay. So we have add book, implements initializable. Initialize. Add book controller. Okay. So to me, this looks like the controller. If the controller itself is like ASP.NET's controller, I think this controller does a bit too much. Like this thing seems that it should go to the database layer, as there is lots of SQL and stuff like that. Well, there is the SQL. There is the addition.
Yeah, I completely agree. It seems to me as if whoever wrote this code has the right idea about, you know, separating things into like a database layer and add book layer, but as well as having this add book, you would also have a book model, you know, what represents the book, and the model will communicate with the database, and then, you know, and then to each layer, the information will sort of cascade down from the model to the controller, where validation and that sort of stuff is applied, your business rules, and then finally then it gets presented to the user in the final view. So I think you have the right idea. It's just sort of like a half-ass implementation of it, which is fine because I'm guessing, you know, this sort of concept is new, you know, but you're sort of on the right path.
So a book model would be needed, and
right. So to actually take this to the next level, you need services that talk to some repositories that access the data.
Yes. So basically, what is action event in Java?
Event handler?
Yeah, it's just a normal event.
So, as a controller, just being a controller, what does it mean that it's a controller? It's not the same as ASP.NET controller, right?
It is just the MVC pattern.
Oh, okay. So is this for
Rather MVVM maybe. But
I think it's more, yeah. I mean, this is basically Java's version of WPF. This is
Okay, okay.
Java effects.
right, so it's called controller, but it's more something as a view model.
Yeah,
It's binding to those.
right, right. So action event, you should map from action event to the book, and you should then validate the book stuff here. And if it's not valid, then you can print stuff here. Now the SQL part should go to some repository or just other class that knows about this. Let's say a books repository would probably make sense. So yeah, all those SQL statements. So I'll just add a remark here. All the SQL related stuff should be moved away out of this class into a repository for books, and your controller should just call the repository and be as thin as possible, just to wire things up.
The controller should not directly speak to the repository though.
Yeah, that is the job usually of the model. The model will interact with the database layer, you know, the DAL, and then from there, you know, that's where your repositories would live.
The model.
Well, the service.
Yeah, the service. Okay. Not implement them. So what's the point of having the service still if the service would just have one-liners of that repository? Or is it in case the service starts having mixed repositories, then you just expose the service for what it can do?
So that's one big part. So it's not
Mhm.
coupled to one repository.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Well, yeah, that's mostly the reason.
Okay. But for this case, you will only ever have one. For book, you'll have book repository. Would you still make it as...
It's not extendable, so.
Okay. You might want to consider...
So how I see it is the repository is just directly accessing the database with a query, and then you have a service that actually makes those queries.
Well, that is true. Like, that is true. Yeah.
Yeah. And for the queries themselves, I would take it a step further. And I mean, obviously, you know, you would want some sort of, you'd want to add some sort of parameter to the queries to not be prone to SQL injection. But in addition to that, you would want to create some sort of builder, like some sort of query builder, which builds and returns to you a query, which you can then pass around and do what you want with. I think that would be a lot better, you know, to actually have a query builder of some sort, which could even be a service.
To move this to a service, but its own service, just to build queries, like nothing else, just build queries.
But then it would be easier, you know, for that when you consider the different types of queries that you would build. You know, it wouldn't just be one query; it would be multiple, and you know, with a builder, you can sort of add that layer of customization.
Yeah, it's true. Okay. So basically move all of this stuff to a repository, and the repository gets called by the service for books. and then you have this controller calling the service, and basically it would mean that each of those methods is just 1 or 2 lines, and
Also,
yeah, go on.
the alerts that they have like 2 alerts that are basically 3 alerts that are basically the same
Yeah.
lines of code. That can definitely be a function.
Yes.
So you just pass the type and the content text.
Just the content text. That's the only difference I see.
And the type information and error.
Yeah, if you look at
Oh,
the
yes,
code, it
yes,
reflects
yeah,
content in the other.
that's true. Okay. Private, void, print, error.
Well, show alert, I would say.
Okay, show alert.
It is not a print statement.
That is true. And we pass in probably this. It's like a norm, right? And we pass in message. So string message. And this is the message. We'll paste it there. Okay. And there we have it there. There we have it there. Okay. Show alert with this. And this. Oops. And the same for others. Error. Okay. And one more.
Yeah, also, I think this is a point which we've brought up before or touched on before, but I mean, I'm not a huge fan of abbreviations. In my opinion, you should never abbreviate variable names. There are some cases which are domain specific, as to which you may want to use an abbreviation, you know, but in general, you want to be explicit. You know, the variable name should tell you, should give you context as to what you're doing.
Yeah.
QU is not a good name.
Yeah.
I would call this, just type it in full query.
Yeah.
Or what,
Yeah. The only exception to this rule, I would say, if your scope for that variable is very small, and I don't think Java has it, something like LINQ, where you literally have...
It does
Right.
actually. It has something called streams, but I think that's in later versions of Java.
Uh-huh.
But
So for that, I would say just naming it in one letter, since you have lots of those expressions, is okay-ish. That's an excuse, exception to the rule. I think that then it's fine not to be full.
Yeah, I could also live with, for instance, the result said RS, but yeah, for the query QU that's bad.
Yeah, it doesn't mean anything. Like, there is no abbreviation. Even Q, if you just named it Q, it would be better. Q just makes it confusing. But in general, QU.
But would you dislike the RS in check data?
Check
personally,
data.
I would just call this result, call it what it is.
I would as well.
Set.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I wouldn't abbreviate to RS. I mean, I can understand why you would, and if this was in a code base I was working on, I could live with that. But typically, I would just say results or result set. I just type it out in full. I'm not a fan of this.
Yep. Yeah, for me there are just certain classes that are so common and widely used that I accepted 4, and one of them is definitely result set. So yeah.
All right. Let's move on to the next one, to the book.
Or for instance, if you have button and you say BTN, I think that's fine.
Yeah. And I actually do that if I'm working, you know, like in win forms or swing, you know, and I actually name
Mhm.
like control, like ATN, name, whatever, you know, and then I would have a sort of action with that. But one thing as to which I wanted to ask you about, I mean, I've done a bit of Java in the past, but I haven't really worked with Java effects. Now, one thing I noticed is like these fields, right, are public. Now, I'm guessing is that they're public just so that the
Right.
XML can
Right.
see, right? But in C# or WPF, you would use properties. Java obviously doesn't have properties, but I'm wondering if you could just, you know, bypass that by binding the get and set methods
Yeah.
instead of the actual field. I'm not sure if that's the thing. So, you know.
No, that's definitely not a thing for the get. Definitely not.
Oh. So they have to be public then.
Or wait, actually, I'm doubting myself now.
It should be a getter and setter always. If you expose anything, you never expose public data. You only expose it ever through getter and setter
Yes,
methods.
but the issue here is that the JavaFX has to be able to use it.
Yeah, exactly. So I was wondering if you could just use
Right.
the annotation, you know, and maybe that would expose it just to the XML. So like you could have like private text book author, and then just put the XML attribute on it, and maybe that I'm not sure how it works, but I really would like, you know.
I'm not sure, but at the same time, what problem does it solve? Because you're still exposing it, and they should be private, like ideally.
Yeah, I understand that, but then there should also be some sort of encapsulation with that. It's like when you expose a property in C#, it uses methods behind the scene, right? So there's that layer of encapsulation. Here, there is no encapsulation. That's the part that kind of makes me uneasy about.
Yes,
here.
I'm just thinking about what the benefit of encapsulation would be in this case.
Well, maybe you want something read only, write only. That's one. Maybe something
But
happens.
Still, you have to expose it for the JavaFX, so you need both set and get.
Okay.
So in any case, I think it's not possible because you need get and set method, and it will not know what to do with that.
Yeah. Fair enough. I mean, it makes sense. It's just
Also, it would have to change the whole. For instance, if it binds to a button and it wants to change one property, it would have to set a whole new button. Does that make sense?
Well, I mean, in the case of a button, I would just bind it to a public action, and that should be fine, right? Because exposing some sort of event would be fine. I'm fine with that. I'm just not fine with you know, raw public field like it. I mean, I sort of get what you're saying. I don't know if Java has a workaround, but it's just weird for me to see because I'm used to, you know, making everything as private as possible. And when I have these public sort of when I have these public fields, you know, it just it doesn't sit well with me.
Yeah.
You have to have it like it.
Is there a reason why those are just as a bunch of fields and not an object? Must it like bind to?
Right. So these text and text area are all JavaFX elements, and they bind to the view.
But those, I mean, those that are not just fields, private fields.
I think it's not probably not necessary, but it was probably easier for him. I can see that.
I would use an object here because just a bunch of floating data, which is related.
You can use an object. I just understand why he probably has it.
So
or at the very least, you can just make them local variables as and when you need it. So I mean, like, you could do like string ID, book title, dot set text, and then pass in title.
Mm.
You know, so you can use these as like, but even so, you know, this will just be an object with getters and setters, so it'll essentially be kind of like a model, and then you just call the methods from there, you know, like get title, set title, whatever the case may be.
Okay, he just messaged me that these strings were used to store the data from the database, but I'm not sure.
Okay. Anyways, definitely an object here, because the only place you ever set it, actually where you ever create it, is in here. There is where you actually create everything. So load data is the method which should not set each of those fields, but instead it should return a book. Or I actually don't know what the object would be. Genre, author is read, length, description, lender. Let's say a book. So load book is a better name than load data. Load book.
Yeah, maybe we can set up a sample with a service.
Sure. Though I'm not familiar with writing, so it would probably have mistakes, but we can make oh god, what's the name for it? Pseudocode.
Yeah.
Uh,
Sort of do, it's like an example service, just to give an idea of what we're referring to.
Yeah.
When we say service.
So this is
I
a
get it's
file.
interpreting.
Folder. So you would have services folder, right? And you have repositories folder, right? Oh god. Can I move it here? Awesome.
So also one change as to which I would make here is here in the folder structure, right? You have your it's split up between a database and UI. That's fine, but I would do it further, right? So I would have like a client folder and a service folder, right? Where each folder represents its own package or its own namespace. And there, you know, you can have repositories live on the server folder where they should be, and then you can have the client package or client namespace separate. So just having those two folders, you know, would help in seeing where these boundaries lie within your application. It's just a small thing, but I think it's something that should be sort of included going forward as well, just where you sort of split your folders up in terms of their.
Right, I usually have my repositories part of the services.
It does make sense because it's a kind of a service. And what about those things that call repositories? Do you separate them in their own folder? Do you call them? How do you separate
The
those?
services call the repositories, so they are in the services folder. I'm not sure what you meant.
You meant, so you said that there is a service, right?
Right.
Sorry, that there is a repository, and you said that the repository should be called by some service. And then the controller, the UI element, calls the service, which calls the repository.
Correct, yes.
So the distinction between those two, if you both keep them in services folder.
Yeah, so the distinction is that repository is a service but higher level.
Yes, but do you keep them in the same folder? Do you separate the folders?
No, exactly. So I would have in C# I would have a new project even for the repositories, but
yes.
I would name them services.repositories. So in this case, I would have a folder inside the services folder.
Okay, yeah. So I was confused how you do it in Java. Okay. So we have private connection. I don't know how the connection is.
Also, we have a question from the chat.
Okay. Is the purpose of the repository to use these different services, example Curie Builder, to do certain things like add a book to the database? So the sole purpose of a repository is to have CRUD for that single model. So everything that is the database related for a book would sit in Books repository. That is literally what the repository is for.
Yeah, and just to elaborate on that, the purpose of the repository would be to essentially run queries on the database. So I mean, if you think of your database layer as its own layer, within that, you would have your connection to the database, and also within that would live your repositories, and the repositories would be responsible for accessing, and running queries against the database.
So you would have create book, well, just create method, which takes a book and creates it. Then you would have update book, delete by ID, and get by ID or get all.
And would you return void or boolean?
Void, because I like the separation between commands and queries. Commands just being something that executes and doesn't return. If it does fail, it should just throw an exception. So they should all be throw SQL exception, I guess. Or however it's called in Java.
Yeah, seems fine.
And here you get, how is it a list of book? Is that how you would write it?
You would use an iterator if you wanted to.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. So just a proof of concept of how the repository would look like. Privately, you would have, how is read-only in Java?
I'm not actually.
Yeah, there isn't really a read-only.
Okay.
Final is constant, so, and it's even stranger than constant. because,
Okay.
Yeah, I don't fully remember it, but final acts a little different.
Okay,
Yeah,
so connection.
Yeah, final on a field will just make it a constant. And final, in other contexts such as a class or a method, they'll behave slightly differently. Although I'm actually quite surprised that Java doesn't have its own version.
Yeah, me too.
Oh, I think it has a lot to do with that it doesn't have getters and setters either. Because a read-only, in a way,
Yeah,
is
it's just a get method in that sense.
So basically, every repository is just database related stuff. So you create a repository by passing a connection, and when you're done, you're supposed to dispose it, close it. So is it just close?
Yeah, but the class in that case would implement iClosable.
I did that.
Yeah, but this is a C# thing, right? I mean, I get that it's pseudocode, but in Java, it extends and implements it. The repository implements iClosable.
Oh, right. Yeah, and that's fine now, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so as Joshman said, with resource, books repository will pass the connection, and then as soon as the books repository is done, it would dispose the connection.
Also a question from the author again. He asked, are they something like a helper class from which I can use the methods instead of writing them multiple times?
Basically, go on, you can explain.
Yeah, so the difference between a helper class and a service is that a service is responsible for communication between layers, which is a huge difference between because like the service is, for instance, getting information from the data access layer and then returning it to the UI layer. And then helper can be inside the same layer.
Basically consider that helper is not related to any specific thing. It can be used independent of what you're dealing with and across layers. But repositories are responsible for database layer. Services are responsible for communicating that back to UI. So it's just a responsibility, a very strict responsibility that each service serves. And the word service, it serves something to something, serves something across layers.
Yeah, in this case, a book service would sort of act like a data transfer object, right? As to where, you know, the book service has the repository, and then you know, it has the responsibility of transferring across boundaries or transferring between.
Well, you wouldn't be passing around the service itself, just the object. And data transfer object is slightly different as it's just data. It's not supposed to carry logic with it. So you create a book service by passing books repository.
Your constructor is books repository.
Yes. Is there an inversion of control container in Java? There is, of course.
What? You cut up?
Inversion of control container. IOC.
There is, sure, yeah.
Okay. So ideally you want this as an interface so it can be
I think it
replaced.
should be part of the Spring framework.
Right.
I haven't touched it myself.
So you create a book, just a rewrite basically. Update a book. Delete ID. Get ID. Get everything. Close. Okay. This looks very redundant, probably to you, the guy whose code is being reviewed, but it's just to separate the concerns and move this to another layer, so that if complexity grows, if suddenly in your book service you have, let's say, library as well or something.
Your book service shouldn't implement closable.
Okay. Right, because you would. What would you do? Why not?
Or wait, it should. Never mind.
Yeah, it should.
I'm sorry. Yes.
Okay. And yeah. Okay. So the purpose of this right now, it looks redundant, but in the future it might be more complicated. This sole purpose of this class is just call different components like repositories and wire things up so that it can serve all that the UI needs or other project needs in a single call at ease. And here you would move your SQL statements and everything that is database related. And here you just call that repository.
Right. So a simple example: if you have, for instance, an author and a book table, and you delete for instance, an author, you should also delete all books. So then you would have just one service doing accessing 2 repositories.
Yes. Though, yes, yeah. That's a good example. Okay. So that's how your repository would look like. Potentially, maybe, so if there are other tightly related repositories, it would go here. Okay.
Yeah, and I think it's worth pointing out as well that if the repository was an interface, you know, you would have it's like a general, like say, book repository, but then you know, you could build other repositories which go to like genre and author and whatever, you know, and just build out these different repositories, and then you'll just be able to access them. So the idea is that, you know, you wouldn't have just one, like say, book repository, but, you know, depending on your system, it's like if you was to expand this as to, you know, as to become a library where you have books, you have videos and whatever, you know, each one of them would have its own sort of service and its own repository.
Right. Back to book controller. So this would basically be just a book. It would disappear altogether. And here you would have that thing that is load book, which would be... it's also very weird. So it's not load book, it's load books. And it's a bunch of books. So I'm also a bit... Does it make sense to you guys? As it looks like it would only get the last book that there is. Because you are executing select all.
Yeah.
And this will ever get the last book that is being selected by the result set as you are iterating over it, but you're ever using one. So it doesn't make sense to me.
No, it doesn't.
Because you want all books.
Yeah, and also for the naming of it, I mean, I guess those books is fine, but typically the naming convention would be get. So it'd be like get book or get books, you know.
Definitely, yes.
Yeah. And, sorry, wrong method. Get for everything and wrong place. So you would have this, you would have this. KD doesn't work, amazing. Well, you have to live with it. So you have query, result set, and can you convert result set easily to an object, let's say? Well, anyways, add this to a list of books and return. So you return iterator book, and here you create a new book. There is no var, right?
There is.
There is?
It's in a newer version of Java, but
people don't like it.
when I was doing Java, I think we were at Java 10, and everybody was still compiling in Java 8 because, well, Java 8 was just much better, and the compatibility was much better. So with 32-bit systems, so.
Oh god. Okay, so basically instead of having those properties as fields as raw data, I'm just encapsulating it in a book class.
it's also worth pointing out as well is that this get method would essentially call on your books repository. You know, I mean, obviously, you know, we have just demonstrated a.
I just moved it to the books repository.
Oh right, okay.
Yeah. Okay. And so after the while, you return. Wait, wrong. Scope. No, it's not. Yeah, this is the place. So we return here the books. I don't know how you store it in Java in a list. But let's just call it a list of books. Can you clarify? Is that okay?
Yep.
No, well,
No.
not quite because
Array list because
Yeah.
interface.
Okay.
right?
because list is the interface, array list or you
Okay.
know, whatever would be the implementation of that. It's a bit weird.
Oh, okay. That's
Oh,
weird.
It's not weird. It's just a different convention. From saying
Yes.
I list is
Also,
the-
I always have trouble naming my interfaces in Java because there's no I.
Yeah.
So if you have, for instance, a books repository, how would you name the interface? So in that case, I would go with a book repository and I books repository, or a book repository and books repository, and that doesn't make sense. Like,
Yeah.
I mean, when I write Java code, people must hate me for it because I would just leave the I in. You know, to me it just makes more sense.
Yeah.
Because I mean, if you have a class called book and your interface is also called book, surely that would cause problems if you was to extend from book. Let's say if it was an abstract class or something, and then implement book, you know, you would get errors right with the same name, or wouldn't you? Because
Yeah.
in C# you would have like an
right?
iBook and a book, so it's clear which one the interface is. But I'm not sure if that would cause errors if you was to implement a class in Java or extend from it, and then implement an interface with the same name as the class, because there's no difference.
Oh.
I still don't know why they never implemented the prefix to the conventions.
Here,
It's like
Yeah,
he does.
started with like
Go on.
an interface tells what it has, so it's never an is relationship. So then it makes sense to not have an I prefix.
Yeah.
But nowadays we use it like for everything.
but I mean, it sort of does make sense in a way, or at least you know, from the perspective of the Java developers, they have two different keywords to implement two different things. C# uses the colon operator, you know, to implement an interface or to extend from a class.
Right.
Whereas Java has extends and implements, so it's clear which one you are using. But if you're extending from a class and also implementing an interface, which is common, you know, the actual naming convention would be a little strange because, you know, it'd be like extends book and then implements book,
Yes.
you know, and it's like, I'm not sure if that would cause any errors. Would it actually cause errors to have an interface the same name as a class?
It should, yes.
Yeah.
Pretty sure that will have
Yeah.
some
Yeah.
ambiguity.
Yeah. I thought as much, but you know, it's still weird. You know, I just use the I anyway. There's a lot of naming convention or Java standard naming convention kind of bugs me. It's like using camel case for methods rather than.
I do
than
like
Pascal.
the total uppercases for
Yeah.
constants. I actually violate the C# convention for that. Yes.
Bastard.
Sometimes I forget to be honest, so it's maybe better to just stick with C# so I am at least consistent. But
Okay, let's continue. So I just moved delete and get to the repositories. But I'm doing this wrong. So he is using stored, basically prepared statements, basically parameterized SQL statements somewhere. But I don't know why in this case specifically. Maybe because in other places it wasn't like it could have been just properly hard-coded, and in this case it's with a parameter as ID comes, though ID is always in, so it's a bit weird because there probably isn't anything that you could pass here that would mess it up. But
Also, there's still UI logic in this one.
yeah, there is a UI logic here, so we need to get rid of it. This, I think, is the UI, all the UI logic there is. So delete. Book controller. So
Also, correct me if I'm wrong, but where he has that parameter, that question mark, wouldn't you have to map that somehow to the ID? You know, just to say, well, okay, the ID being passed is being mapped to this parameter. Wouldn't you do that at all? I mean, I imagine you would, right? You know, you would map the ID coming in to the parameter so that it knows, you know, that association.
let's see what's done here. It is there, you see.
Oh, right, sorry. Yeah, I completely missed that.
Yeah. Okay. So we have book.
So this name again, right? PSTMT. That one is also
Prepared statement.
right. I don't like that one.
Just PS, we would call it, I guess, right? You.
I guess it's nah.
Full? Okay.
I think I would just go with statement.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I see nothing wrong with just calling it.
Yeah, I agree. So back to the point about naming, I guess it would make sense to have abbreviations for things that are commonly widely used. For example, if I'm doing a for loop, I more often write I instead of index because it's obvious what the I is for. Or if
Yeah, I sort of take
yeah.
a different stance on that. I do use index when or CNT for count or something, but I mean typically I would type it out in full. If I have a nested loop, I would split it into like row and column. You know, that just makes it a little.
I do that too, yeah. But for the normal one with an I just go with I.
Yeah.
But yes, I also use row and column a lot.
Okay, what else can we do? So there is quite a bit of extraction needed, but you get the point, I think, that we do need to separate UI stuff from your database stuff and then other logic that sits. So other than just combining different repositories, a service could also have non-database related logic that maybe combines the results into one, validates one against another, does some processing of what you retrieved from the repository. It is basically the wiring point of all the logic that is needed for the UI. The last point that UI will call. And if you were to yeah, never mind. So that's what I want to say. Okay.
Yeah, and some examples of like non-database services, I guess some just general services as to which you may want to use. You know, a logger would be a service like it's like if you wanted to build a logging system to sort of like log to a file, or and this is probably the most common, it's like a validator. Like if you wanted to apply some sort of validation to your data which was being displayed, you could put it through a validator. But you know, obviously, validating data, well, it's going to have different rule sets, and those rule sets would need to be sort of, they would need to be able to be updated and changed a lot. So I mean, you could just stick your validation logic into a service, which could have different types of validation coming in.
Yeah. Okay. what do you guys think about? So we have book controller and book description. It's a bit weird to me. Like, where does this come
It,
from?
it seems to me as that the book description, you know, I think this is a case of trying to split it out too much. Um, things like
Yeah,
it's like book controller is fine, book description, and I think
lender.
another one like Len. Yeah, I mean these should essentially be your models, right? So I mean you should have like a book model, you know, and that should have like title, description with a
Mm-hmm.
bunch of get set methods, and then just use that. So I mean you have a book, and then you have a book controller. That association is fine, and then whenever you will just use that book model
And
as
yeah,
and when you need to.
and this looks like identical. It's literally just copy pasted, except that book lender is replaced with book description.
Yeah.
I cannot see an immediate way of refactoring this, but again, if you were to use
The
some...
only thing that has to be refactored is the repository again, because that
Yes,
solves everything here.
yes, but he would need some general query builder for building queries, and then repository would use that query builder to build queries out of models that you pass. That is the thing that he would need to figure
Good,
out.
yeah.
Because I don't see a very easy way to otherwise
Yeah, so you
change
you
queries.
could do that in the service, creating the query, or you actually have, if you have quite advanced queries, you can indeed go with a query builder and pass a whole statement or query.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so we covered this offer list.
And again, it's kind of a similar thing as to where, you know, as to where when you separate your logic or your requirements into layers, you know, rather than have like author list author controller, whatever, I would just have author, which would just be your model, and then you could have author controller, and that should be fine. Maybe
Right.
you would want like an author view as well, but that would be more
Yes.
of an FXML thing. So typically you would have 3 classes per layer, right? You'd have a model, you'd have a controller, and you'd have a view. Whatever your view is, in this case, would be Java effects thing. But yeah, I think you've sort of gone a bit too specific here, like list genre controller. It doesn't need to be that specific. It's just genre controller, genre view.
Yeah. So moving ahead, what I really dislike in this file is the static offer, because to me offer is a model and models are never static. And I don't see the purpose of this very clearly. What is this for? I cannot see. And this looks like it follows encapsulation principles on top of that, even though
Yeah,
it's
I
weird.
understand. I mean, it's probably just a bit of laziness, or rather, it could be to complement the singleton. Is that he's got, you know, so like you can just do author dot get name. But I agree, like you should never have static. I mean, okay, let me rephrase that. Static is something which you should avoid like 99% of the time.
Static is good when you have helper methods or something that doesn't require a state, as long as it's
Operation
stateless.
output.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. So like if you wanted to build a logger class, you know, to log things, right? You could make that static, or make it a singleton rather, and that would be fine. But you know, typically when dealing with static, you know, you would make something static which has no state. So things like utility classes. So if you look at Java's math class, right? You know, that can be static. That doesn't need to be an instance because it has no state. It's just performing math operations, you know, on, you know, so that's fine. It's more of a utility class. But for anything like this, you know, where you're building out a system and various classes have states. You know, you want to avoid static entirely if you can help it.
Yeah.
Nothing should be static.
Yeah, so that applies especially to methods, but for
Oh.
properties it could make sense sometimes, especially for instance for the logger it could make sense.
Yeah.
Though I don't know, yeah, in C# I don't have that static.
I mean, even in C#, you know, when I use static, it's very reserved. But you know, I will make event static, for example. I have no problem with making event static, but that's really the only place where I would use it frequently in C# if I'm making a lot of events. But then, you know, a a an event, when you think about it, has no state. You know, it's something which you hook into, so you can access it by doing like class name dot event, and then whatever you append to that event, whatever you subscribe, you know, that's the state that's being appended to it. That's happening locally. In Java, you know, you might want to do a similar thing where you have as to where you sort of make an event static, but that would be, you know, pretty much the only valid reason
To me, making events static sounds a bit weird because you lose the context of a caller, because you cannot pass the like there is ever going to be a single source of event, so there is no caller context, and you limit yourself in that case by always saying it's null.
Yeah, it's not something which I do a lot of. I mean, if it makes sense, I will make an event non-static. I mean, you know, to be honest, when I append static to anything, I always feel dirty for doing so. You know, it's kind of like a hack. You know, if you make something static, the there's always a workaround. You know, as to where that could be non-static. And to me, static is kind of like just giving up or taking the easy way out because
Yeah.
you were using it when you could avoid using it, sort of thing. So, you know, 99% of the time, I never use static.
Yeah.
It doesn't need to be used.
Same.
And sorry, I was going to suggest that if you think something does need to be static, or that it does need to be accessed by another system or by another class, you could just use dependency inversion or dependency injection and just inject that class where you need it, and then that kind of gets around your headache of making it static.
Yeah.
So, I mean, it's like if you take this author class, you can inject it into a method of wherever you need it, and then, you know, do things to it there, whereas, you know, rather than making it global and just saying, you know, everyone can access it. So
Yeah, that's true. So can someone explain how is this even valid? Like you have a static class, and for static class you have a constructor with parameters.
To be honest, I didn't even know that a static class was valid in Java. So, yeah, there's your answer. I don't know.
And you have properties. Isn't this a property?
This is a field, a constant field.
Okay.
is that something built into the Java API then, or is that like a Java effects thing?
Oh, I've never heard of it.
Yeah, I've never heard of simple string property either. I've never.
Okay, but it's bizarre. How can it be?
It's a JavaFX specific.
Okay, okay. So maybe it's for the. Okay, the whole thing is JavaFX specific. Like you need to declare a static class and have those so that it's for the view.
It's really weird as well as to how you have a constructor. Now I know is that you can have a static constructor, but
Right.
you know, passing information in like this as if it wasn't a static
Yeah.
is a bit weird. So.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Oh.
I don't know.
Okay.
Does this compile?
Probably. I trust the guy. Again, and the pattern repeats all across for everything. so, well, all of those classes share the same things, the same problems, that you just need to separate database stuff from UI stuff and business logic stuff from the rest as well. So you have essentially always at least three layers: your data layer, your business logic layer, and your UI layer. And what I do like though is that you didn't touch this class at all. And I presume that this is the default class that gets generated.
Right, for JavaFX.
Yeah, so that's good. And oh, so you do close the connection after you're done with the whole thing. So that's not horrible, but you shouldn't leave it as global, of course.
But what happens here? The shutdown. It says try driver.manager get connection, and then it doesn't do anything with that connection.
Oh, that's true.
So
A plus for effort could be a bit better. You close it, right? You close is the...
that's another one. Con instead of connection. That's also alright.
Yeah, I agree. Okay.
Because the driver manager is static, right? Or was static. So that's why he could close it here and not pass it, right?
Yes.
Okay. Oh wait, then you're... Yes, that's correct. Okay.
Yeah, so one other thing as well as which I want to bring up again, I think it's been touched on before, but this string should really be in its own file. I'm not really sure how you could do that with Java effect. I mean, does it have
yeah.
its own app config, or would you have to, you know, just store it in like a preferences file and just read that and, you know, grab the string that way?
It has been repeated consistently all across the application. I would just make this as a public for now as the easiest fix, not to repeat the string and reuse what you have. So you should just reuse this as a public all across. And it's actually quite strange because in some places you do have the constant and in other places you just use the string right away. So you should just use a single string. Maybe the easiest way would just be have a class of its own just for this thing. But I think that it kind of suits in database handler. But the best way, if you know how, is to use resource folder.
This would be solved by having repositories again.
Yeah,
Right?
definitely.
It would still need to be shared.
Maybe.
And
With
to-
a base repository or whatever.
Well, I don't see what the base repository... A generic repository, that's true. You could use it.
Generic repository.
Yeah. But his cases don't seem to be that generic. Unless you would use that query builder, then you could have
Oh,
generic.
yeah, but then you would just have a dependency injection ideally,
Yeah.
and inject it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay, so this is okay. Again, magic numbers. I don't know what those numbers mean. And you would want to split those magic values. Not split, but explain magic values using constants.
Yeah, and it always it seems a little bit weird as to how you're checking against error codes. I mean, I can understand it in a certain case, but you're saying if the error code isn't this or the code isn't this, then do something. Why would you need to print the stack trace if you don't get either of these errors, this error number or this code? I don't know. That seems a bit weird. Typically, it shouldn't really matter, right? I mean, if it throws an error, you know, you would log it anyway.
Maybe it's a good error.
Oh yeah, the constants might have explained why. So,
Um,
so I'm missing curly braces here, which is quite annoying in that if statement because it's not continuing, returning,
yeah.
breaking.
Okay, let's move on. a bunch of windows. So I guess this is very general stuff, though it seems to be mixed.
Yeah, it's pretty much Java's Java affects UI stuff because it's like a node-based system.
Yeah.
You know, you'd have to, it's just boilerplate. But then that to me says all the more reason that that should be in its own class. So instead of it being a controller, well, I suppose it could be a controller, but the actual setup could probably be in its own class, as to like set up a particular UI or initialize it. Because when you have all this setup logic in the controller, it doesn't really make sense because controllers are usually for something specific that they aren't for generating UIs, which is what this is doing as well.
Also, can you scroll up a bit to the switching scenes methods? Because I remember a lot of issues with that. Yeah, you were there, a bit above. Yes, the load book table and these methods.
Mm-hmm.
If I recall it correctly, there were quite some issues due to which you had to make this static and in one class in order to be able to switch scenes in other scenes, which is, yeah. I don't know if you know anything about it, but...
Yeah.
What is that switching between views?
This is, yes, this is switching between views. Like the load window has now a parent which loads the FXML loader, and then you have a stage which contains the scene. Oh, that's the point. And in order to switch scenes in another scene, you need that stage.
Yeah.
So you have to expose it somehow. And I found that the best way to do that is to make these methods static.
Yeah, or if you wanted to, you could probably put it in some sort of like service again. It's like a service locator. Some people consider that an anti-pattern, but I mean, you could sort of like have navigation logic in there as to where you request from the service, I want this view, and it'll just build it.
Right.
So,
well, the problem that Service Locator solves is having multiple services accessible globally, and this is just one service, so you probably don't need a manager for just one thing, unless it grows, where you need to access more global stuff. Yeah. And it also depends, like, so do other classes actually access this, or
they should, like, so for now maybe not if it's a simple app, but if you have, for instance, a home page and a whatever page, then from the second page you would have to switch scenes, and it would have one central point with the stage. So that's why these methods should either be static or you would have some manager kind of idea.
Right.
In WPF, for example, you can use the data template and data context to sort of switch between views.
Right.
Does JavaFX have a similar way as to where you could bake it into the view itself? Some sort of data binding to switch between.
So as far as I know, they don't. But it's been quite a long time, so maybe it's fixed now. But there were quite some issues with this, and also, well, it's maybe too specific, but sometimes it just wouldn't load the FXML file. But it was in the early stages, so I hope that that's fixed. I don't know.
Alright, let's continue. The guy said that this was just copy-pasted from GitHub. He found the code and just pasted it. I don't know what's it for, he doesn't know it either, and it's just code, random code on the internet, let's just classify it as such. By the way, if the author of this code has no license, no open source license, and he sees that you use this code, he can sue you for it.
Trust me, nobody else writes that.
Yeah.
It's very specific.
It's a bait. It's a bait. Okay, let's just continue with the UI stuff. Pretty general, probably nothing much to comment on this. Is there data binding like for WPF and JavaFX? And
Yes, of course.
and is this something like it does sound like HTML, but it's actually
It's just like XAML.
yeah, it's just like
It's
some.
XML based and
Oh yes, sorry. Yeah. Okay.
just like HTML. So yeah,
Yeah.
that's also XML based. So
Yeah. Yeah.
sure, it's kind of similar. And the cool thing about FXML is that you can just drag and drop with the scene builder.
You can do that in WPF as well.
Right, yeah.
Okay. Is there any other alternative for building a UI with Java?
Yes, so you have also Swing, but that's the old-fashioned Java UI, which is disgusting, I guess.
Yeah, it is.
Personally, I used Swing, but inside JavaFX applications to get benefits of both.
Mm-hmm. I think overall, just looking at UI, it looks alright. I think it's quite good. Like to me, just looking at it,
It looks so. Yeah.
it looks understandable, readable, and all is good for the UI part.
As far as UI is readable, yeah.
Yes. So yes, I think we are done with the review.
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah.
so overall, just split the. At the very minimum, your application should have 3 layers. Well, yeah, 3 layers. So you should never ever mix UI with the persistence. So that's 2 layers, and the third layer is that you should also have business logic separation from the UI and from the data persistence layer. So business logic refers to data persistence, and UI refers to business logic. And like this, you have 3 layers at minimum, which are strongly separated between one another. And when you need to add functionality, you know exactly where you need to go because it serves either of those 3 layers always.
Yeah, exactly. It's all about knowing the boundaries of your application, you know, or in other words, the different layers. And this goes back to what I was saying earlier about having a good folder structure. So I think Java kind of works similar to C# in the way where if you create a folder, that folder essentially becomes its own package or its own namespace. So when you start a new project in Java, you can have that separation straight away just by having a server folder and a client folder. But then you could split it up into like having a data access layer. You know, you could, you know, and in the client you could have your presentation logic where, you know, models, views, controllers, they would all be folders. And doing this kind of allows you to see where the boundaries of your application lies. Because if you're accessing the repository, you would have to import the repositories package, which indicates is that it's a cross of boundaries, right? And I don't know. At least for me, that it sort of helps to use packages or to use namespaces to further define where those boundaries lie or where those layers lie.
Yeah, I agree to that. And another thing is just your code could be a bit more OP where you put stuff like validation of the object state into the object itself and not outside, because it's definitely not a part of a controller. And static for classes is just weird and you should avoid that. And just prefer to split stuff into just objects for the related data, for tightly related data, just encapsulate it in a class for that data and manage state internally for that object, as long as it doesn't relate to anything else. And I think we're done with the review. Do you guys have anything else to add?
No, I think everything's been covered. I just hope it was, helpful and it's sort of informative to the guy whose code we're reviewing. I think it went a lot better than the previous review.
Yes, it did.
Yeah, so if he has any questions, you can just ask.
Yeah.
Also, Line 3P seems to have finally understood the services. That's also good. So
That's great.
that definitely was useful.
It took him a long time.
Only a year and a half. Well, when you think about it, probably less than for me and you, Julian, at least.
Yep. I mean, we still don't know it.
Yes, and actually, when you think about it, what at work, I don't do this like specifically. It's again different pattern that I do at work. For example, you say you use a service which hooks up repositories. I don't do that. I
We don't
use
have services.
we do have services, but we have
Microservices, but not like that.
yeah, same. That's the point. Like
Yep.
splitting it sometimes feels redundant. So but that doesn't change the fact that we still have separation of concerns within the services. Like a service is responsible for that one thing.
Yeah, exactly, and that's also where it becomes a little bit difficult as well when you study, OOP, or you study design. Well, not so much design patterns, but when you get into this solid mindset of designing good clean code, a lot of it comes down to experience and you can agree and disagree in various amounts. Like, I mean, it can become difficult to split this logic up, because a lot of it is sort of goes on how you as the programmer think about these different requirements, and there's no right or wrong as such. I mean, but then if you was to ask like 5 different programmers, you'd probably get like 10 different answers as to how it should be done. But ultimately, there isn't right or wrong. It's just about it can just be hard to acquire that mindset to begin with, of knowing where those boundaries lie and what to separate and what's the separation of concern. All this type of stuff can be a bit easy, when first learning it.
Yeah. But it's something that you should expose yourself to as early as possible and just practice. Just being aware that you can do that and you should be doing that is the first step to mastering it. So I think you were familiarized and made aware of that this is the way to go, and that separation of concerns is quite neat, and we hope that you'll practice it. So thank you for your attention, for your time, for the reviewers, and see you next time, next Sunday, for reviewing probably Unity project this time.
All right. See you.
See you.
All right, cheers, guys.